the fact that 8 children died in a boat accident in the Sene East District in the Bono East region. And while residents are shocked, these students or pupils just wanted to have education. Just think about that in a minute. The fact that you wanted to have education, and in wanting to have education, you lose your life. Now, Sene East District Chief Executive Jerome Kofi has been recounting the incident to Joy News while indicating that the situation could have been prevented if their challenges, including inadequate teachers, were addressed by the Ministry of Education. Listen to him.
They crossed from Atiga government to Wayokope, and the community always assists them anytime the students will have to cross. And this is the situation. They've been crossing with we have 2 madams there, so they've been crossing with them always. So this time around, the madam, one of them was sick, then the other one had also traveled. So the students will have to cross themselves. So when they got to the river bank, they're supposed to have gotten somebody to cross them. But because we didn't have enough premise for it, it was very difficult for them to get people to cross them. So those people who uses the super, that is the actual fuel that we buy from the filling stations, they usually don't want to spend it on the children. So this man who went for fishing came and the children were stranded, decided that he was going to help the children. So he uses his normal canoe, that is the one they use for the fishing. We have the larger one and the small type. So it was the small type that there was an outboard motor on it. So in the process of crossing the children, they outnumbered the quantity of the boat owner. That is, the children having entered and they were crowded. They got to the middle of the water, and one of the students decided he wanted to fetch water and drink. So in the process of fetching the water, the man told him to stop. Unfortunately, by then the child had already gone down and was fetching the water. And the water, the canoe dipped into the distance, the water, and then fetched some of the water inside. So upon struggling, then some of the students fell into the water. So the man decided he was going to save those who fell in the water. So in the process of saving those who fell in the water, then some of them could also swim. Then some of them swim and held one side of the canoe. And then it swayed and all of them fell inside. Oh. So when they fell inside, there were about 3 or 4 people far from where they were. So they had to call other people and they rushed in. So when they got there, the man was removing some of them, and then the community also helped in removing the students. Unfortunately, 8 of them passed on. Some of the communities, we don't have schools, but it is scattered and far. Those that are not far, because of the river, we have the Sene River joining the Akusumo River. So it's very large. So some of the areas you have to cross in before you get to the next school or the closest school. That is why I had submitted lists of teachers who have completed University of Cape Coast, Winneba, and the Jackson College of Education for them to be employed by Ministry of Education. I went to Minister Honorable Adechum several times requesting for those teachers to be employed. And here in the case, they have not been employed, and we're still having an adequate number of teachers. So assuming that we're having enough teachers, those there would have gotten annexed. The fact that the government hasn't given approval for us to create additional schools, would have used Wayokope School and they have annexed there. So that the teachers will be staying there and they'll be teaching the children.
8 pupils returning from school. All they wanted, education. Today we mourn them. But the question really is, would their souls or spirits be happy that their death would not be in vain? Will this trigger any change in our society? Would we look back and say, never again should this happen? Raymond?
No, I do not think so. Because first, these are not the kids of the rich and powerful in this country. I recall the decision to rebuild police hospital was because a powerful person, a minister's wife, had died in the very dilapidated structure there. See, we make decisions, major decisions, because it involves people that are powerful in the society or gets the attention of the powerful in a way that they cannot actually do anything about it. It's so it's so unconscionable a situation. Now, I was looking at a report. I remember my first interview with current minister as substantive minister, that's Minister of Education. I referenced this report. This report is titled Proximity of Residential Structures to Essential Surface Facilities. This is the Ghana 2021 Population and Housing Census, Volume 2. This was released in 2021. I brought it to his attention that the report, among other things, is saying that in rural areas, there are so many communities where schools are, but they are very, very far from where the people live. So people have to travel to go and access them. Of course, it's not only about schools, it's about police station, it's also about health facilities and other things. Then the minister was not so sure whether he had seen the reports, and so said he was going to get his team to work on it so that going forward, whenever we are citing schools and making sure we fill in the gap, we look for those who are farthest and where it is most importantly supposed to be situated. Why I'm referencing this because I heard the DC say, I've gone to the minister, I've made the appeal to him, and I've met him. I met him to try and intervene. He's not asking for a school to be built closer to the people in the area, which would have been an alternative solution to the problem anyway. He's not asking for that. He's just saying that I have identified people from this area that I believe when you deploy to the schools here, the kids will not have to travel that far for education. And that all that you need to do as minister is use your powers, whichever what they call it, control you have, get the people to be deployed here. I've identified them so that they will work within these communities. Now, I'm not saying that if they were deployed, the kids wouldn't have had died and this incident would have happened. I'm just saying that perhaps if we are taking those steps serious, if we have been a little bit proactive, if we are not concentrated on whether Ghana has schools of fame or schools of shame, if we were more into solving problems rather than talking about them, we wouldn't have had 9 of our future leaders wipe off the surface of this earth for no reason. So it's people may get angry for a period of time because they've lost family members. But it's unconscionable that we allow lives that we need to protect being lost with processes like this. And Winston, when I was referencing the report, maybe if I share specifically some of these things, you'll be interested.
Please do before I get onto the phone line.
Oh, okay. Just briefly.
Yeah.
It talks about residential, no, not residential, educational facilities and its location. So listen to this one. There's variation in the index of concentration in most pronounced on the pre-primary level. So in urban and rural areas, the indexation of concentration is the same at the primary and JHS levels, while the pre-primary urban areas have 34 facilities per 1,000 population, aged between 4 and 5 years, and 28 in rural areas. That means that when you compare the rural areas, the schools are situated very far from where the people live in ways that it sometimes discourages going to school.
Yeah.
Transportation is an issue. Having to feed yourself for that long distance is also an issue. Traveling to attend school in this case is the problem. They are not saying that you should put it within, in every community, but it should be within a way that people within several communities in an area can access. So this report, if the education ministry was minded by this report, this is not Jojo's report. This is not, a report for only the people who have died in that area. It's a report for the entire country. If the education ministry was minded by it, between the time they had released this report in 2021 and this year, at least we would have intervened in the most serious of the situations where we need schools closer to the people.
Okay.
Because when I was telling the man, the education minister, he appeared not to have seen the report or been in the know of it. I didn't really put a lot of emphasis on that. But the expectation is that after that, as he promised, he was going to get a report, know the areas where schools are needed closer to people so that they don't have to travel long distances and go by boat or the other alternatives that ends up in the very alternative death and the other things that happen to them.
Now, let me bring in our guest for this particular conversation. Kofi Asare is Executive Director of Africa Education Watch, and Emmanuel Kojo is a trained and certified teacher with 27 years experience in the classroom. Kofi, Emmanuel, good morning, and well, can we say the morning is good? Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you can hear me, Kofi and Emmanuel.
Yes, waiting.
Great. So let me start off with you, Kofi. Now, 8 pupils dying, all in an attempt to have education in Ghana in the year of our Lord 2023. Where did we go wrong? Where did we get it wrong, Kofi? That today, after 66 years of independence, we're still having these conversations. Well, I think Kofi can't hear me. So let me get you to address that issue. Emmanuel, you're a teacher. You've been teaching for the past 27 years. And there's the situation we're faced with. Students drowning while returning from school. And the question is, should we be going through this? Should it be so difficult for us just to have education in Ghana?
Well, good morning, Winston, and good morning to your listeners. I don't think it is a question that should even be asked by even a class 1 child, because we know that education is a fundamental human right. It is an inalienable right for every citizen of Ghana to have access to education, not just education, but quality education. But the question we need to ask ourselves is whether our education has been ever fit for purpose. Listen, to tell you the truth, I was appalled and very, very disappointed when I heard on your 6 p.m. news yesterday, the Minister of Education, whom we all believed in, make this comment. When I heard him make those comments, I was surprised. And he didn't even have any shame to use the word, to even catalog his credentials as running schools in America. And so this is how American schools are run. Just a couple of days back, we just heard that 8 children or so have drowned on a river. As if that is not bad enough, shouldn't that have even been a reason why things must change? And you get a media institution, which is supposed to be the fourth estate realm, bring out these issues, and you are blaming the organization. I mean, in other countries, the minister wouldn't have his job. And this is to say it without even mentioning words. I am very disappointed that nobody is asking a question or questions. I think that in civilized societies, the minister would have been held to the Parliament of Ghana to answer questions. The fact that even 8 people died while trying to access education, it is unthinkable. And we have money to throw at CFHS, which is not even working with it. I am disappointed, honestly. You see, when we say these things, we don't say them because we think that we are better placed to talk on radio about these things. But not all of us can afford the Cambridge education. And that is why we need to make sure we fix our own education so that it should be accessible to all.
Okay. I'll go back to you, Emmanuel, but let me get Kofi back on this. Kofi, so this is what we are faced with. 8 pupils dying while returning from school. Kofi, why is it difficult for us to situate schools close to communities where students can easily have access to these schools?
Well, good morning, Winston and panelists, and to your audience. Let me indicate first that I'm saddened that 48 hours after people's ground on their way to school. 8 pupils, we are yet to hear or receive an official statement from the Ministry of Education or from the juniors, especially the juniors. One would have expected that 2 days after such a national catastrophe involving children aged between 4 and 12, there should have been an official statement assuring citizens that measures were being put in place to ensure that this doesn't occur again. Now, the challenge with fighting schools in communities has to do first with the issue of resources. And this resonates with what multimedia has been, serializing for some time now, the schools of shame. At the base of all this is a resource issue. So if you have to cite schools in communities, according to it's not a policy, but it's actually a convention. The convention to cite schools within 2 to 5 kilometers of communities. The meaning is that no child is allowed to travel more than 2 kilometers to attend kindergarten, and then lower primary, and then more than 5 kilometers to attend the junior high school. But you find that on the ground, it doesn't work. It's because of resource deficits. And it's also because of the declining investment in basic education infrastructure. But once you are putting in less and less funding in basic education infrastructure, it will manifest in the lack of schools. Now, if you look critically at the trends in financing, Get Fund is a major infrastructure financing basket within the education sector. If you look at the trend since 2018, and I'm not saying that the lack of schools in communities started in 2018. But if you look at the most immediate trend between 2018 and now, in the past 5 years, you realize that averagely less than 19%, 19, of Get Fund goes into basic education infrastructure. Majority of Get Fund, averagely 40 to 44%, goes into secondary education infrastructure because of the free senior high school program. Okay, and then we have the second about 40% going into tertiary education. So if you look at the infrastructure commitment of Get Fund, basic education is never a priority. It is the least priority. So you will continue to experience fewer and fewer funds being available to provide schools in underserved communities like Kofi and then the other communities in the island areas, and continue to have schools under trees until the financial architecture begins to prioritize basic education infrastructure.
These are things we know, for instance. So you share the statistics with us. We know, for instance, that, and I mean, times past since 1995, we've been talking about free, compulsory, universal basic education. And so if you're doing this, you're doing that bearing in mind also that you have to ensure that the facilities are available. If the resources are there, why is it difficult for our leaders to transfer them into the areas that matter the most?
We have a challenge on our hands. We've always had a challenge, equitable deployment of education resources. It's been there for about 20 years, where we've realized that there's been unbalanced development. Now, the Constitution under 36.2 provides for even and balanced development. Okay, and by so doing, we are to ensure that the economy is managed such that resources for developing education, health, among others, are available in an equitable manner, irrespective of one's geography. What we find is that the model that the state has been using to deliver education is grounded on foundations of inequity. That is why if you go to the 5 northern regions, you have about 60% of the schools there being primary schools, not having junior high schools. That's why you have about 80% of the schools under trees concentrated in those 5 regions alone. And that's why you realize that in the Savannah region alone, about half of the children there are not in school, even though the national out of school average is 10%. So if you have 10% children who are out of school nationally, the Ghana Statistical Service, if you go to that region alone, Savannah, almost 45% of the students or school going are not in school. It is a reflection of the foundations of inequity in which education has been delivered over time. But with the introduction of free secondary education, this situation has been worsened because even the few resources that were coming into basic education infrastructure development are now being put into the expansion of secondary education because of the high demand for secondary education resulting from the free secondary education program. So what you find is that if you do an analysis of the discretionary budget of the education ministry, pick out salaries, look at goods and services, and then capital expenditure, you realize that increasingly secondary education is getting about 55 to 60% of the discretionary budget. And basic education share is reducing up to about 15 to 12%. The reality is that without appreciating that the fundamentals for deploying resources is inequitable, and if we continue this way, we will achieve unbalanced development of education. Nothing will change. And I'll give you an example very simple. 2.5 years ago, the government of Ghana launched an initiative to eradicate all the schools and trees. It was a laudable idea, in part after a Afful Trust Fund. We needed 3.5 billion to eradicate 5,400 schools and trees. Okay. Now, we are in year 3. But as of now, the commitment the government of Ghana has made beyond the words is close to 0. So we haven't even eradicated 1%. Not even 54 schools, which is 1%, have been built. In fact, not even 20. And we are in year 3. By the plan, we should have eradicated at least 1,100 every year and completed the process by 5 years. But we are in year 3, and we are still around 20 or 17. It tells you that the commitment to put money into that business is not there because there is a huge demand for secondary education where government has to provide infrastructure to meet the growing needs of secondary education. Don't forget that secondary education, free secondary education, is a flagship, but basic education infrastructure is not a flagship. So we will continue to have such inequities if we don't discipline ourselves and wean ourselves from this seeming flagship approach to social service governance. If we don't find common grounds to find a balance between how we apportion resources among what we call flagships and then the regular social services system, it will get to a point where we'll be having something similar to an apartheid, and we shouldn't get there. But until then, there must be the awareness and the admission that if we continue to deploy about 18% maximum of get funds to basic education, when basic education has the highest infrastructure gap of more than 10,000 basic schools needed to ensure that no school is under a tree and ensure that the 1 million children who are out of school are enrolled, if we don't put in majority of get funds in basic education or basic school infrastructure, there is no way you are going to see the infrastructure deficit being reduced, especially in the deprived areas that we are talking about. That is the reality. It starts with putting in funds. And we've had countless engagements with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Finance. We've done so many researches, we've done documentaries, we've had them aired, all to raise the awareness that government, the model we are running is depriving basic education infrastructure. It is depriving basic education of infrastructure. If we don't change it this way, we'll get to a point where the quality of resources we need from the raw material base, from basic education, to feed into secondary education will not be available.
Okay.
You understand? So ours is to continue to draw government attention to the inequity until government decides to change the model and have a more equitable way of using the little we have. And how do you do that? You do that by reducing how much you are spending on secondary education and then trying to get people to participate.
Okay.
And then also increasing how much you are spending on basic education and as well getting people to participate. Then you achieve a balance. But the current model we are running is never a balancing one. It is a model which is mainly tilted towards achieving the objectives of a flagship, which is good. But the manner in which we are approaching it will continue to affect basic education infrastructure. And that is why you shouldn't be worried when you hear that in a district like Mamprugu, Maduri, in the Mamprugu area, about 80% of the students in primary schools do not have access to desks. You understand? So it's not just a matter of infrastructure, hard infrastructure, but also soft infrastructure like that are not even available. It's a resource, it's a financing issue.